Hello everyone, my name is Karolyn Hernandez, and this week I did my journal article review on the article entitled Participation and Interaction of Deaf and Hard of Hearing Students in Inclusion Classroom by Khalid N. Alassam. And So, quick overview of the article. This article reviewed a study conducted in an inclusive education program for deaf and hard of hearing students. The purpose of this study was to determine the barriers that students who are deaf or hard of hearing in inclusive classrooms face regarding participation and interaction in the classroom. The study also discussed strategies that can help facilitate participation and interaction in students who are deaf or hard of hearing. So the article talks about why I conducted this study, and it was because some previous studies have shown that students who are deaf or hard of hearing in inclusive classrooms have seen a negative effect in their communication and interaction skills. So the study was done to see if there are these kinds of barriers in inclusive classrooms for these students, and if there are strategies that can help in this situation. Authors' perspectives. So data collected from the study showed that a lack of knowledge on behalf of the teachers about deafness and characteristics of the deaf and hard of hearing students proved to be a barrier for these students who are deaf or hard of hearing. So, for example, there was a lack of collaboration skills, which on behalf of the teachers, which influenced their collaboration with other teachers of the students with hearing impairments and with their interpreters. So those kind of things prove to be barriers for these students, because if there's not a collaboration between the teachers, then there'll be a negative effect, which I talk about in this slide also. But yeah. Data also showed that teachers with negative attitudes towards students who are deaf or hard of hearing, or who did not know how to structure activities to facilitate the participation of these students, also worked as barriers. So teachers' negative attitude towards deaf or hard of hearing students promotes a negative attitude toward these students by the hearing students as well. When they see the teachers treat students who are hard of hearing or deaf or have some sort of hearing impairment, right? When they see the teachers treat them as unimportant members in the classroom, then those students who can hear start to see those students like that as well, which is really sad, and sad to think that that's actually happening. So teachers with positive attitudes towards students who are deaf or hard of hearing, it was shown in the study that those teachers actually engaged more with these students and promoted more participation. And then data showed that collaboration between teachers and interpreters, as well as strategies to give students who are deaf or hard of hearing more time to participate in class, can help reduce the barriers that these students have to overcome. So different ways, different strategies that were talked about were giving students more time to answer questions. So understanding that a student who is hard of hearing or deaf has to be looking at the interpreter and who's signing the questions that the teacher says. So first the teacher says the question, then the interpreter interprets it in sign language. So then the student has to be looking at the teacher and looking at the interpreter and writing down the information also and trying to understand it at the same time. And so teachers, if they aren't giving them enough time to answer these questions, or they're just asking the questions and then going right away, answering it right away, or having a student answer it right away who can hear, that's putting a disadvantage on the students who can't hear. So that's one strategy. So giving them more time. Speaking slowly was also one that was mentioned. So if the teacher speaks more slowly, then the interpreter is going to have more time to be able to sign it. That's giving the student more opportunity, more time to understand everything that's going on, to take in all the information, and to ask questions if they need to ask questions, and also to keep up. Because if the teacher talks too quickly, the student is not going to be able to keep up with the information. Also educate the class and oneself, obviously, on deafness and sign language, and encourage hearing students to be patient with the deaf or hard of hearing students. So if they see that, if the teacher sees that students are starting to have a negative outlook or attitude towards the students who can't hear or who are deaf or hard of hearing, if they see that starts to happen because the teacher's going too slowly or they're getting annoyed or why do we have to wait for them? Why do we have to do this? Just educating them on their situation and trying to get them to be empathetic towards these students because it's not their fault and it will by encouraging them to understand what's happening and by giving them information and teaching them even a little bit of sign language if possible, that promotes communication between students who hear and who cannot, um, to kind of like bridge that gap, which the language barrier is large, but being able to bridge that a little bit or to minimize that, that helps a lot with participation because the student feels included and feels like they can participate and that the classroom wants them there, then they'll be more likely to open up and to participate in that. And then my reaction, I was disappointed, obviously, to see the results show that many of the barriers that students who are deaf or hard of hearing face regarding participation and interaction in classrooms has to do with lack of knowledge on the teacher's behalf. Because the teacher is so busy and so caught up in, am I doing this right? Oh no, I don't know what I'm doing. How do I help the student? What do I do? Or they're just like, I don't care. I don't want to know about that. They're annoying to me. They're making the process more difficult for me because now I have to deal with the interpreter and now I have to deal with their special accommodations and all that stuff, which it's sad to think that a teacher would think like that, but unfortunately that's what data showed many teachers are thinking, which is really sad. But yeah, I was very disappointed to see that. I was, and obviously it stirs something in me, and hopefully it stirs something in whoever watches this to be better and to not let that be the case for us moving on. To change that stigma. And then after reading this article, I see the importance of keeping communication strong between all who oversee the implementation of the IEPs of students with disabilities and special needs. So if there's not an open line of communication between teachers and interpreters in this situation, in this case, but also between special therapists and like behavioral therapists or counselors and administration and the student and their parents and all that. If there isn't an open line of communication, it makes it a lot harder on the student as well as on the teacher, because if you don't know what's going on, if you don't know how to best help them or what their struggles have been lately, what their triggers have been lately, and things like that, how are you expected to be able to teach them effectively and to actually, promote participation in a way that will be helpful for them, and that's not going to be harming. So definitely showed me that in this because of the lack of communication that was seen between teachers and the interpreters for these students, in this particular study. And implications to practice. If I or any of my future colleagues have children in our classrooms that are deaf or hard of hearing, I will do my best to educate myself and my students in order to promote participation. And not just to promote participation, but in order for them to feel like a family. I was talking to the director of special needs and of special education in my school that I'm currently working in, and he spoke to me how in his classroom, because he does teach the classroom, in his classroom of all children who have special needs, he promotes a very like family atmosphere, and he tells them, these are your brothers and sisters. We're going to take care of each other. Like this is an open environment, which I loved. Then he also mentioned how one of the students is on the spectrum and he takes things very literally. So he was like, this is not my brother. They're not my blood brothers. They're not my blood sisters, like that's not the case. But he had to explain to them, no, it's not necessarily that, that they're related to you, but in this classroom, we're kind to one another. We are accepting like a family, and we treat each other as such. So I think that that's super important to promote in a classroom, especially when there are children who have special needs, or in this case, if there's a child who is deaf or hard of hearing and has an interpreter, understanding that that's difficult for them. So teaching your students, encouraging your students to be accepting, to be loving, to be kind. That's very big, because if you don't do it, who's going to do it? If you tell them, oh, it doesn't matter, if you don't acknowledge it and you don't talk to your students about this, who is, so that was a very big thing I took from this. And then also, I will also just suggest that teachers and students get an opportunity to have basic sign language training available to them to help facilitate inclusion in and outside of the classroom. Um, this one is not really up to me, obviously that's up to administration, that's up to if the school can fund that, if it's a public or private organization, like um, where I am, what the atmosphere is, all of that. But definitely it's something that's very interesting. And even if it's just the basic things, just saying hello or good morning, just being able to say that to sign those things. Not only is that going to be really great and that's going to promote obviously participation, but also just promote a happy and a healthier environment in the classroom. But also that'll help students who are hearing students. It's not just going to help the children who are deaf or hard of hearing. It also helps students who can hear, because in the future, I mean, one, put it on your resume, they use sign language if they become fluent, or if they start to pursue that. But also, it'll make them more compassionate. Definitely will bring out more compassion in them towards the people around them and make them think twice before they say something rude or mean or anything like that. So definitely something that I want to look into and that if possible, to implement in my classroom and in the school that I'm working in. I would love to do that because that would go a long way in helping students and faculty be more compassionate and more knowledgeable about the situation. And these are my references, and I hope that you guys all enjoyed.